All right, it's time for another edition of Bull in the Basement, a decorated sports broadcaster, and I'm proud to have him as a guest on this. Pete Weber joins us from his home in Nashville. Pete, great to see you and great to have you on. How are you?
I'm doing fine, and I really appreciate you having invited me. This is great.
Absolutely. I cannot believe it's been almost 25 years of Nashville Predator hockey. Where's the time gone?
Someplace very rapidly, someplace in some time capsule, someplace has swallowed this all up. It's been rather incredible when you think about it. And because I had a lunch yesterday with one of my friends from back home in Illinois, and he brought out a newspaper clipping of me from 1969. So I've just been inundated with these passage of time things.
You have obviously seen some successes and some failures, but incredible what you've been able to live through there. And of course, your life in terms of broadcasting has been incredible as well. And you to still be doing this at 70 years old, man, I'll tell you, anybody that's in the broadcasting world, to know that you could maybe get to, I think people hope they can get there to 50, but if you make it to 70, that's a statement on your excellence in what you've done over the years. So let me ask you this. RJ, of course, Rick Jeanneret in Buffalo.
Right.
This year is what they're calling his last call. Have you thought about, what it'll be like walking off into the sunset, or are you just not ready for that? You don't like golf and gardening that much?
I hate golf and I really hate gardening. So no, I've not thought about it. As a matter of fact, I think my best lesson on that always came from Bill's longtime head coach, Marv Levy. He said, once you begin thinking about retirement, you've already, in fact, done it. So I want to keep on going. I don't know if I want to go like Bob Miller, who was my partner in the Los Angeles Kings. He was a University of Iowa student with Harry Kalas. And Harry Kalas was carried dead out of the press box at the Washington Nationals ballpark a few years ago. Don't know if I want to go quite that far, but I sort of understand the sentiment in that direction.
But your love of what you do at this point, I'm sure, and maybe for your entire career, you probably feel like you're stealing money at this point, right? Very funny. Talk about your life in terms of radio and TV. It is a very irregular lifestyle in terms of the hours and the days and the time that you donate to it or give to it. And you clearly have to have a very tolerant family.
Yes. My wife, thankfully, is a big sports fan. As a matter of fact, we met at the Odd in January of 1985. And I think I found out right then and there, this potentially is a very good one. And over 32 years of marriage, it has turned out to be just that.
Very good. How much we've heard Josh Allen talk about this, about how Buffalo reminds him of his town in California. How much did Buffalo remind you of your town growing up in Illinois?
A great deal, except my town growing up in Illinois had a total population of about 37,000. So it was by several factors larger, to be certain. And I also got to say, growing up Catholic in a Western Illinois town, I felt like I was definitely a minority right then and there, because everybody else's name was Larson, Peterson, Anderson, and they were all Lutherans. But get to Buffalo, and there are quite a few other Catholics there. So that was a very much making me feel at ease, not to mention the fervor for sports in Western New York.
Yeah, for sure. Your resume, as I mentioned in the open, is absolutely incredible. But before I want to get to that, I want to circle back to RJ real quick. Obviously, yes. I'm sure Rick means a lot to you. You're, I'm sure, very friendly, and you obviously worked together for a bunch of years. Talk a little bit about what he means and how people talk about Rick Jeanneret around the league.
They talk about him as a guy who is so different, it seems, from virtually everybody else, though he still does the same job as the rest of us do, but they admire his enthusiasm for the work. And you can talk about me doing it at 70. Rick is a little bit older than I. So he has carried this on for a great deal of time. As a matter of fact, as I recall, my partner here for a long time, Terry Crisp, was playing for the Niagara Falls Flyers in 63, and Rick was doing those games back then. So that gives you a little perspective on how long he has been doing it.
really good segue, Pete, that you probably didn't intend to do, but Terry Crisp, of course, was a part of the Flames organization.
Yeah.
And if it were not for Calgary coming down with COVID, we wouldn't be doing this today. So my question for you is, over your 5 decades of sports broadcasting, is COVID the most unique thing? It's probably a simple answer, but is it the most unique thing that you and sports has had to deal with over the last 50 years?
I don't even have to think about it. There's no question but that it is. And the one thing it has done, perhaps, you know how Lee Corso is known not just for his predictions and putting mascot heads on Saturday mornings, but he's known as a pencil salesman for Ticonderoga pencils. And one thing we've had to do during this COVID era is put all of our appointments down in pencil rather than ink. Because, for example, like you said, we would not be doing this podcast right now had the Calgary Flames not gone into a virtually entire team COVID protocol and postponing the game on Monday on Chicago, the game tonight in Nashville, and then their game on Thursday. And with 3 more players added to the list today, I wonder if they're going to have a chance of playing at home on Saturday.
Why has, you speak of Nashville, and I'm going to go back to COVID. Why has Nashville been really, for most of your time there, why has it been, having been an expansion team, why has it been such a successful organization over this quarter century?
I think from the very outset, they decided to make every game. You might recall what it was like when I was with the Bisons. Every game's an event. That's essentially the attitude they have taken here. And it wasn't because I passed along every game's an event to them, but they have made it a fun experience for the fans coming in. And then after 4 or 5 years, they made the playoffs for the first time. And then that was pure hysteria. And so they make the playoffs for the first time in 2004, shut down for 2004, 2005, as did the rest of the league, and then come back and make the Cup final in 2017. And that was just a delirious period for me. And it was one where I still can't forget some of those games and some of the players involved in them. But for that matter, I also can't forget Sebastian Bordeleau scoring an overtime goal at the end of January in 1999 against Marty Brodeur, and then 2 days before. And this was the Predators' first ever Father's Trip, something they pioneered in the league. And in the first game of the Father's Trip, they beat Dominik Hasek and the Sabres at whatever the arena was called back then. I'm sorry, I don't clearly. You realize how many different names we have run through in just the last 25 years? I mean, Philadelphia started out as the Core States Arena, then became First Union Center, which all of us thought was very applicable to Philadelphia, the FU Center, and then go on to, to like Wells Fargo as they are now. But it's been, we have to constantly check our minds as to what rink we are in as we are welcoming people into the broadcast.
Were you a country music fan prior to going to Nashville?
I'll tell you a good demonstrative story about that. The country radio seminar was in town our first year. One of my college friends was on CBS's Country Network, and he was in town for it. And he called me and he said, hey, we got a private invitation if you want to come tonight. And he said, for Brooks and Dunn. So I said, well, no, Nick, I'm not really interested. So I hung up, and then my wife said, who did he say the concert was with? And I said, I don't know, Dunn and Bradstreet or somebody like that. And she goes, Brooks and Dunn, you call him right back. And we go there that night at the Hard Rock Cafe in downtown Nashville. And as we walk inside, a guy I worked with at WGIL Radio in Galesburg was standing at the bar, who by then was the radio and records correspondent for Nashville. And he does the countdown shows, Lon Helton. So I'm glad I called Nick back that he could still make the arrangements for us.
Do you own, and is it mandatory if you live there, a cowboy hat?
I do have a cowboy hat. It helps for a lot of public appearances, but I'm not one of those people, and I'm not going to make myself the equivalent of JFK, but he hated hats too. And all those years I spent in baseball, rarely do you see me in a baseball cap unless it's raining outside. So not a hat guy, basically, but it's sort of like protecting the brand.
Let me ask you too. It's been made pretty famous, where the Bills fan base has gone over the last maybe 10 years in terms of the Mafia, and even more famous when the Mafia travels to Nashville.
Yes.
So what?
Each of the last 2 years, and
yeah.
I'm part of the Nashville Bills backers. So I've seen this up close and personal.
I was going to say, what is the Nashvilleian takeaway of Bill's Mafia? What do the folks that live there think of us?
They think the most important thing to do is protect their card tables. They try to pull them inside so that nobody jumps through them and breaks them. But I got to tell you, I think that the bar owners, the establishment owners, can't wait for them to come back again. As a matter of fact, I think our director of the Visitors Bureau is petitioned the NFL to put Buffalo, Pittsburgh, and Chicago in the Titans division because they would drink the town dry.
Pete Weber joins us again. Let's go back to his resume. Kings, Sabres, Preds, obviously hockey, Bills for a long time during the Super Bowl years, by the way.
But also before, Rich, I earned those Super Bowl years by doing John Murphy and I, Jim Militello and I, we did a weekly highlight show, Buffalo Bills Magazine, produced by Ralph Taverna after his property left town for Seattle. So we did a weekly half-hour show with highlights of 2-14, 2-14, 4-12 after signing Jim Kelly. So I feel like I earned those great years with the Bill Polian Marv Levy Bills.
You definitely paid your dues. And I wish the same had happened for me because I did almost 15 years on Bills radio and never saw a playoff game at all. So
it's all timing. It's all timing. Yeah. Nothing to do with the individual.
Timing and luck. That's right, for sure. Yeah. Then you do so talk about, because this one sort of stood out to me. Tell me about your time doing Seattle Supersonics games.
Yeah, and now if I mention that to youngsters who are going, who the heck were they?
Right.
So they've been gone for 13 years now, ever since Howard Schultz, the owner of Starbucks, always looking for a way to put an extra buck on your bill, sells the team to a guy who said, no, I'm not going to move them. Well, within a year or so, he did, to Oklahoma City. But those times were a great deal of fun. I had guys like Gus Williams and Jack Sikma and Lonnie Shelton. Those guys were tremendous to work with. And another guy who was most tremendous to work with was the guy who announced, I believe, the first selection for the Seattle Kraken expansion team, our coach, the Hall of Famer, Lenny Wilkins. Glad to see him looking so well. And we played the games at that point in time, virtually all of them in the Kingdom. So you had 28,000 people coming in to see Dr. J when the Sixers came to town, and like-size crowds when Kareem and Magic and Norm Nixon came up north to that dome. It was absolutely a fantastic experience for me. And do you like good side stories?
Of course, please.
Okay, John Sterling, now better known as voice of the Yankees.
Sure.
In that era, and this is 81, 82, was the voice of the Atlanta Hawks. So with the time zone difference, he had a talk show to do, I think about 3 hours before we actually went on the air. And then the game. Well, the game was about to go to triple overtime. John had a crisis. He had to go to the bathroom. So we faked an emergency long distance call for him. Well, I think I'll just hand the microphone back here to Skip Carey, who's doing the television. We'll do a simulcast for a bit. And then he hustles down what was the first base line at the Kingdom and goes back into the first base dugout bathroom. And about 5 minutes later, he walked out with the most incredible look of relief on his face and picked the microphone back up from Skip Carey. He still remembers that story. He'll tell it often.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I remember those Sonic teams were fun to watch. In fact, I met Gus Williams for the very first time a couple of years ago at a Jim Kelly at his golf event.
Yes.
Super good guy. And yeah. I remember vividly, I want to say, was it the Sonics and maybe the Bullets in the NBA Finals the one year? Was that right?
Well, they played in the final 2 consecutive years.
Okay.
78 and 79, and split the championships there in that period of time. And then Jack Sikma, whose games I had also called when he was in the high school finals in Illinois back in 1973, before he went on to Illinois Wesleyan and became an unheralded NBA draft pick, came out and did the job very, very well. Lenny Wilkins had an outstanding club put together there. And other guys like Wally Walker and James Donaldson. Okay, to get to that triple overtime against the Hawks, we had Freddie Downtown Brown at the free throw line, shooting 2. We didn't have a 3-point shot then yet. We were down by 3. So he makes the first one, no problem. The second one, he goes over to James Donaldson, who was stationed on the right block. James about 7'1", 270. And he goes, I'm going to miss it to you. And there was maybe just a little less, as I recall, a little less than a second left on the clock. He missed it right to James Donaldson, put it up and in. Time for the third overtime.
That's fantastic. What did the human eraser? Did he play for the Sonics?
Not while I was there, but
No,
yes,
okay.
he did.
Okay, Marvin Webster. Yeah, back in the day. I have no idea where I pulled that out of, because unless you're a hardcore NBA,
I think it was that bookcase back there.
Was
I think it was the bookcase right underneath the white Bills helmet.
Probably. So there's the NBA. I mean, wow. And that's, for me, I'm in my early teenage years, and I was a huge Celtic fan back then, the Havliceks, pre-Bird, those teams, JoJo White, those teams. And
JoJo White, Mr. Rochester there for a while.
That's right.
Yeah. And then Kevin McHale, he's coaching the Houston Rockets. The Rockets and the Preds are both in Chicago at the same hotel. Kevin is lounging downstairs in the lobby. And I almost had him talked into, because he had played high school hockey in Minnesota, I almost had him talked into coming to our practice that morning and standing in front of the net for the power play. Could you have imagined that reach he has? I mean, I think he would have been entirely effective.
It's funny, Pete, that you mentioned that, because I was at the Sabres game the other night, and a conversation came up about the size of goaltenders in 2021 compared to what they were when you were doing, Sabre games back in the day.
Instead of guys, Cloutier?
Sure. Yeah. Guys are 5'6", right? 5'7", and their pads are tiny. And the conversation was, look at the size of these guys now. They're 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", and their pads are huge. And we got to make this more difficult for the goal scorers, because you get guys that size who are that athletic with the benefit of having the pad size that they have. So what are your thoughts on that? Because you've seen both, obviously.
Yeah. I've seen that, the evolution of what has happened with that. It's been fantastic to observe. But I always thought that with our great nutritional studies and so on, science would find a way to give us a goaltender who was 4 feet tall by 6 feet wide. And I think the closest we ever came to that was in high school hockey in Buffalo at Timon with Donald Butch Palmer. You remember the Butcher. And he was 5'10", 320 at one point. But his problem was he would go to the ice and not just stand up and block the goal opening. So that's how he got scored on. So you got to have the size, but the discipline too.
For sure. Okay, let's circle back now to hockey again. With COVID for you, and I know it's been true for a lot of broadcasters in the NHL, have you been forced to call games very simply watching television monitors?
I was last year, not this. And so when we first came back to finish out the 1920 season, we had much more video available to us. They gave us, like in football, they talk about the all 22. Well, in hockey, they had the all 12 on one of the video feeds for us. Then the other was the telecast, the way it's cut for the viewer at home. But that was just in that fall of 2020. Last year, the 2021s or the 1920 season, we had only the telecast, and some directors, you're prisoners of them, because when the Predators are on the road, we've got to take whatever they cut. And we were in a division with Carolina, Florida, Tampa Bay, and all that. They like to do the artsy shots, close-ups of people's faces. That doesn't help me call action too well. It might help me tell you that something is developing in somebody's right nostril at that point in time. But it's not the greatest thing in the world. And sometimes the sound is so out of sync that we will hear a whistle for a penalty many seconds in advance of the actual penalty announcement. So that got to be a little bit awkward, but I think the people understood what we were going through and cut us a break on that.
Yeah, for sure. What do you make of the most recent chatter amongst a lot of Olympic eligible players of not necessarily wanting to go, with the potential of contracting COVID and being there beyond the Olympics for weeks, maybe a month, even beyond if you were to contract and had to quarantine in China? What do you make of that? How much of a threat is that to hockey in the Olympics, do you believe?
I think it's a great threat. I heard this morning that it could stretch to be as long as a 5-week quarantine over there. I don't think that's what any athlete will want to undergo. I mean, there have been some strange things this year. A good buddy of mine, John Garrett, does the color commentary for the Vancouver Canucks on television. So they all took their tests before opening the season, and they didn't get the results back for John Garrett until they arrived in Edmonton. And then he was stuck in the hotel, not able to leave his room for 12 days. So that's on this side of the pond, as opposed to being in China and having far less of an idea what sort of services you could possibly expect.
So you're in Nashville, obviously, when they first adopted hockey. You
Yeah.
were in LA.
Well, at least NHL.
NHL,
because
right.
they had minor league here for quite a while.
That's right. You were in LA as well. How did folks in Hollywood adapt to hockey, comparable to how the folks in Nashville adapted to at least NHL level hockey?
Very similar, just with a different accent. Instead of, well, the old Valley Girl thing, and here there was the Southern accent. And I'll never forget downstairs after one of our first home games, people waiting for players to come out and get autographs. And I one night truly heard this, and I'm not misrepresenting at all. Hey, Sergey, how about an autograph? And heard that. But the people on that first game against Florida, and the team was shut out that night, October 10th, 98, the people gave the team a standing ovation for the opening faceoff. So they were prepared for this. Some of them had gone to games at Old Municipal Auditorium when they had the Dixie Flyers, who started in the 60s, later on the Nashville South Stars, the Farm Club of Minnesota, and then the Nashville Knights and Ice Tigers. And they lasted right up until when the Predators opened up in 1998. I believe the last NHL franchise, or last minor league franchise that was here, got transferred to Pensacola, Florida. So that, and wouldn't you know it, Predators' second ever exhibition game was in Pensacola, Florida.
There you go.
Yeah, hosted by the Ice Pilots.
You obviously started your career pre-cable, pre-huge money in sports free agency, pre-social media. If social media had been around in the 70s and 80s, would it have been North Dallas 40 times a million, do you think? Because we know obviously it wasn't there then, but now, guys are very, very, very careful about what they're doing and saying. Back then, they were smoking and drinking in the locker room. Guys had off-season jobs because they weren't making any money back then. What a different time, huh?
Remember now, Gordie Howe turned pro at 1947. He had to have an off-season job every year until 1974, when he signed with the WHA Houston Aeros. So that gives you an idea. The guy that should have been the most highly compensated player was needing to work in the off season to keep his family and home together. Yeah, vast changes. Now, part of that is the way society has evolved. Let's think about Gordie Howe. They also had to go to court to get him a better pension. Of course, Alan Eagleson's another story altogether, former head of the NHLPA. He ripped the players off every opportunity he could find. And I'm not worried about libel charges for saying that, because it's now substantiated in court filed documents. Unbelievable what players in this sport, in baseball, football, I still think has the worst union in sports, without any question.
Let's talk a little bit about baseball for you.
Yes.
I'm asking because I don't know. Were you ever given the opportunity to do Major League Baseball?
Yes. But it would have been a cut in pay from my job in Buffalo.
No, what? Really?
Yes, sir.
You're kidding.
No, 1989, shortly after Claudia and I got married, I was offered the Cleveland Indians broadcasting job. And obviously the Indians have an affinity for Buffalo broadcasters somehow.
Right,
not to mention Buffalo shortstops like Lou Boudreau and so on. But I was offered it, and it would have been $10,000 less than I made at WGR and doing the Bison games.
Wow, that's incredible.
Here's the other thing, Rich, the consideration that came in. that was also for the last year of the broadcast contract on that radio station. Far too huge a risk for me to take.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. What is so this you've done a lot of you've done college sports, UB and Bonaventure and Notre Dame and so, all of that. You see that Notre Dame, well, the pennant is behind your head
Yes.
in the shot.
Here, I'll move for you. There you go.
There it is. And they're all different, right? You've done some, obviously your affiliation with the Bills that we mentioned. They're all different, really different games. Some are faster than others. You know, baseball clearly, when you're a great baseball broadcaster, and we don't have to go through the list of them, we know who they are. But when you're a baseball broadcaster, you have to become the best storyteller, maybe of all, right? Compared to the other sports that are just so much more fast, that basically it's play by play and analysis and quick, right?
Yeah, hockey very definitely is that now. Since we came back from the lockout and the hurry up rules, and somebody found a way for glass not to break as frequently as it used to. One game in the Predators' history, we were in San Jose, and there was a glass breakage in each period.
Wow.
So you talk about needing to tell stories, but that pretty much has been erased by now. Now, we will get the odd, and they all carry two Zambonis now, but Zamboni breaking down and needing to tell a story or two while it's still stuck on the ice, and they call AAA or whatever they call for Zambonis, and get them to come out and jump the vehicle to get it going again. But yeah, I feel in some ways like I leave the hockey broadcast booth some nights with way too many stories still to tell. But that was something Vince Scully told us years ago. If you got to do the research before a baseball broadcast to put these notes together. But if you only use 10% of them, so be it. That means you've had a pretty entertaining game.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the inspiration for anybody that's been in broadcasting, I think, is baseball broadcasters, because they are more than just telling you what they see on the field. They know the game inside and out. That's for sure. I know you probably keep a slightly distant eye on Buffalo sports still at this point. So let me ask you about them. Well, I'll start with the Sabres first. Obviously, the longest playoff drought in the NHL, and coach after coach after coach, and GM after GM after GM. They move Eichel. They have boatloads of young talent waiting in the wings, whether it be in college with the guys from Michigan, or the kid, the goalie up in Northeastern, or whether it's kids in Rochester in the A. What do you make? How will they be able to translate that to success? And in your brain, you know, what kind of timeline do you think it might take for the Sabres to get into any kind of playoff contention? And lastly, what do you know about Don Granato, and what are your thoughts about him?
Okay, let's go back here just a little bit. As far as the Jack Eichel mess, I don't think they had any choice but to trade him. And I think they got pretty good piece back. I mean, Alex Tuck, I've been impressed with him from the time he got rescued from Syracuse and brought out to Las Vegas. I think he'll be a good piece for the Sabres. If they are patient with all these youngsters you've sort of outlined, I don't think they're going to be that far off. But again, you have to be patient with them and realize with what you are working or with whom you are working, and hope that they are able to turn it up. I'm sorry about Casey Middlestat needing the surgery recently here, but that's not anything you can probably plan for or prepare for. And I think they can do the job. Now, Don Granato, I've known the family for a long, long time. As a matter of fact, his sister, now a scout for the Seattle Kraken, is married to good friend Ray Ferraro. She just got named to the Hockey Hall of Fame selection committee. And I think that's absolutely great. And I go so far back with that family. I remember when Cammie was doing color commentary for the LA Kings early in the Predators' history. And Tony, an absolutely fantastic individual, and how, I mean, he won a Masterton Trophy one year for his perseverance coming back from brain cancer to play again in the league. I think Don Granato is a gifted coach, and I think given time, he's going to do very, very well.
That's great news for Sabre fans. And I think a lot of Sabre fans agree with you about Donnie Meatballs. Let's talk a little.
Donnie Meatballs is the nickname.
That's his nickname. Yes. Use that when you guys play the Sabres again. Now let's talk a little bit about the Bills. Obviously this year, coming off the AFC Championship game a year ago and the division title and all of that, it's been a roller coaster ride for them. Josh Allen gets hurt in the Tampa game.
Yeah.
They get run over by the Colts. They have a tough game against, obviously, Tennessee there. Then it's the Patriots in the crazy weather game, and then Tampa. Let me start not as a general Bills question with you, but first about the Tampa game in general, because all the discussion in Buffalo about the Tampa game hasn't been about being down 3 touchdowns and Josh's comeback really on his shoulders by himself, but more about officiating.
Tim Brando did a great job on Twitter with that one.
So what are your thoughts?
I thought, as Tim Brando put it, college football has a much better interpretation of pass interference than their NFL brethren does. I mean, how many pictures and I was doing a game, I was doing the Predators Rangers game, at least the outset of it, while the Bills and we're finishing up in Tampa. All the pictures I have seen, and believe you me, I had my DVR going on that game when I got back home so that Claudia could hear me curse when I was back home Monday morning. But that's I don't like bashing officiating as a general rule, but I think it certainly deserved it there.
Yeah, for sure. I gotta say with the Bills real quick, because you did radio shows with really the great golden years of the Bills, at least NFL years, through those Super Bowl years. You did shows with Marv and with Bill Polian and with JK, and obviously you knew them both on air and off air.
Yes.
Share one story from each, if you would, about what kind of guys they were. I mean, I've dealt with all 3 of them myself, but you, I think, were probably a little bit more intimate with them in terms of your professional relationship than I might have been over the years. So if you could talk a little bit about Marv and Bill and Jim.
I'll go with Bill first of all. And I was in his trust at all times. And then there was the comeback game against Houston, where the league was not of a mind to allow for a replay because the game had been blacked out in Western New York. And I went on the air and I gave out the fax number for the NFL office in New York. And then Bill said he was listening to me do that on the radio in the car with his wife, Eileen. And he goes, Eileen, is Pete gone against me or what? And she goes, no, I don't think so. And so he understood that we were essentially at that point in time standing up for the fans who had been shut out. Now, Marv Levy, when I go to Chicago, and I won't have much time there this Friday, the way things are set up right now, but I generally speak with him and oftentimes go out to dinner with him at Harry Carey's restaurant, of which he is a part owner with Ryne Sandberg. So another baseball hero there. Marv is a great guy to correspond with, tremendous individual, and very, very well thought. It's hard to believe this is a guy who is plus 90 years old because the mind is still so facile, still is ready to go to work at a moment's notice. His only problem really is still his hearing. And Marv, I think, revolutionized the NFL. You know how? He had to learn to read lips. He learned very well. Why do head coaches and offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators hold the cards up in front of their mouth? Because they don't want Marv reading their lips about the instructions they're passing along. Jim Kelly was fantastic for me. We used to have neck cracking contests in the studio before doing shows when he came in, though most of the time he was at his house when he was doing them. Then there's another guy who I just had dinner with a couple of weeks ago in Dallas. We did a regular show with Adam Lingner, the Bills long snapper. He is the Bills long snapper and dapper. The Adam Lingner show. Yeah. And he still stays in touch with many of his teammates. And this was when I had dinner, it was just before the passing of Mark Pike.
Yeah.
So I haven't had the chance to go over with him yet, but he told me the story once when he still lived in Minnesota about how they tried to shorten up what turned out to be wide right just a little bit to give Scott Norwood a bit of an advantage. But the problem was Adam was so practiced in his snap, the ball came back to Frank Reich, laces out, didn't have time to spin it back around. That might have lent itself to the wide right kick.
No kidding. No kidding. I always say to folks when they watch this podcast, they're going to laugh and they're going to learn most likely. And I think a lot of people are going to learn something they did not know about Wide Right from you, Mr. Pete Weber. Finally, I've always found it, because I haven't done sports radio in a few years, and it's been hard for me to go back to my childhood or my teenage years to be a fan, if that makes sense. I find myself watching games and almost always somehow being critical, almost somehow. Sometimes I still note take.
Yeah.
For no purpose other than it's just, or it had been routine for me. How about you?
I can be a fan. I'm still a big, as I grew up, St. Louis Cardinals fan. So I take that 4.5-hour drive over to St. Louis and take in Cardinals games. And that's a tremendous recreation for me. Now, I've a friend here who's from Western New York, Jerry Helper, just retired the other day from our management group. But he is just, I mean, you talk about texts that I get from him during Bill's games, and I can tell how he is in pain and so on. But I remember once, I think it was when Dave Senko left the Bills PR crew, and I told him, I'll talk to Bill Pullian if you want to get in there, because he goes, you know something? No, I don't want to. And I go, why? And he goes, it might ruin my childlike perception and fandom for the Bills. And I can understand that.
For sure. I always make the mistake of prefacing the end of something and then coming back to something I forgot to ask you. So I remembered it.
Okay.
Of all the major sports you've covered, what's your favorite one to do?
What season is it?
Great answer.
Yeah, I mean when I was at GR, we, with the Bisons, the Bills, and the Sabres, we just slid from one to the other to the next. And I should also slide in there was the brand new Buffalo Bandits. And one day I did a triple header. I did a double header against Omaha at then Pilot Field, walked down the street to the Odd, and did the Bandits championship game with Philadelphia.
Wow.
And after that night, my hearing was shot because of how loud those fans were. And then I found out later, the cameramen on the telecast could not even hear the director in their headphones. And they had those cushioned headphones up against their ears. So, yeah, what season is it? That's where I am. That's what drives my boat.
You've been to hundreds of arenas and stadiums over the years. You could write. I used to have, as I'm sure you did, the Encyclopedia Britannica, probably either in mom and dad's office or perhaps even in the living room. How we got it, I have no idea.
Usually very ambitious encyclopedia salesperson. That's how it happened.
That's right. But I'll tell you what, you, in terms of all your experiences, could probably write as many volumes as I remember having of those in our living room.
Well, let me tell you, Rich, the other night when we went to the UBS Arena in Long Island, that became my 64th NHL venue.
Wow.
And I will get 65 next month when we go to Seattle.
So I'm going to save you for another time, maybe in a couple of months from now. I'll let you enjoy the holidays. And we'll spend we'll spend some time talking arenas and stadiums and some of what you liked and didn't like, and what some of the magic and not were from some of those, and of course lots more of your sports stories. But
man, we'll have to talk about some of those minor league ballparks,
please. Yeah,
some of those were really, really quirky, including calling a baseball game in Nashua, New Hampshire, in the left field corner.
Wow. Yeah, crazy.
Bison Double-A days.
Nuts. I know Van told me when the Bills played the Patriots in the early years of the AFL, he would call games from inside the Green Monster at Fenway Park, literally looking through like the top of a second hole where a number would be for a baseball game. He had to look through there and look at the field basically from the end zone to call a game. Again, put this in here for another time.
Van was uniquely qualified to do that. No one I ever worked with was more versatile than that.
Pete Weber, awesome having you on. I hope you guys can play hockey again soon.
Yeah, it would be nice.
Yeah, right. And we wish you all the best, obviously, there in Nashville, to you and your extended family through Christmas and New Year's. And let's plan on doing this again after the holidays.
Okay, Rich. Thank you.
Really appreciate it.